The following program is brought to you in part by the film Backdoor Channels, The Price of Peace.
We're back. I am Leon Charney, and we have Raanan Gissin with us. If you don't remember who he is, your memories are bad. You all have Alzheimer's, because Raanan Gissin is probably the preeminent and best spokesman for the people of Israel today. Was the spokesman for Ariel, Sharon, was the spokesman for the government, was the spokesman for the IDF. So he knows how to speak. He won't tell you this, but I will, that he has a PhD from the University of Syracuse. How he got there from Israel, we'll have to ask him, because I'll tell you he grew up in Brooklyn and he became the spokesman. But he's been on tour, and I think he's probably one of the best people to talk to about where Israel is at 60. You know, they're going to celebrate, it is going to celebrate its 60th birthday in about 2-3 weeks. Welcome, Raanan.
Thank you for having me again, Leon.
So 60 years ago, there was no Hamas, there was no PLO, there was only Arabs and people who said that Palestine should be a two-state solution. 1947, November, the UN did it, and look how far we have come.
That's it. That's exactly the point. 60 years ago, the situation was much more difficult than today. Invaded by 7 Arab armies, 600,000 people in the small land of Israel. A group of Harvard analysts told Truman the state is going to survive only for 6 months.
I met a Jewish leader at a party who's doing a book on, I think it was the Peel Commission, I don't remember.
Right, the 1937.
And what the issues were about Palestine are the same as they are today. It doesn't change. He's doing a whole book. He's what the British were thinking at that point.
Not only the issues did not change, but the positions on the issues. The Arabs still refused to recognize the right of a Jewish state to exist, and that was the reason they rejected the two-state solution in 1947. Unfortunately, regrettably, that's the reason why, really one of the main reasons why we're not going to have today a two-state solution at this present stage. The situation is much more complex today.
What do you mean we won't have a two-state solution?
Well,
you don't think there will be?
Not right now. I can't see it happening now.
But what I see now is I see a wave of thinking saying there should be a one-state solution.
Yeah, that's even more dangerous.
That's right, of course. Then that's new thinking right now.
That's even more dangerous. That's the denial of the right of the Jewish people to have a state. You know, you have it with the denial of the Holocaust, and then the second stage was when Ahmadinejad denied the very right of the state to exist and erasing the state off the map and so forth. But you know what? After 60 years, battered and embattled as we are, we're a winning society.
Israel, you know, from its very existence, succeeded in supporting itself and stood up. And even just since the War of Independence, when there was a direct attack against the very settlements that were out on its borders. And this actually brought to mind, you know, people who were there in 1948 to this event that now we are facing, we're coming to the head. What started in 1948 is now coming to a culmination, to the actual thing, that Israel cannot allow the continuation of Hamas to be as it is, that it must destroy Hamas, destroy its military capability, up to the point that it will no longer face existential threat against the state of Israel. And the people of Israel at the time are willing to continue. I mean, this is the strength of the country is not just the strength of Netanyahu, it's the strength of the people.
Well, I think that Hamas suffered a severe blow. I mean, after all, Hamas is not all about the military wing. It did well as far as the military wing was concerned, launch rockets against Israeli cities. But Hamas is also a social and a political power, political party, part of the what I would call the Islamic political trend in the Arab world, part of the Muslim Brothers in Egypt, in Tunisia, in Syria. They had in mind not only to launch, to be engaged in a war with Israel, but also to govern and to establish themselves as a political entity in Gaza. And when you look back at what they did achieve in Gaza, well, null, zero. They cause destruction and misery and prove themselves to be a total failure. And clearly, when they look at what happened during the last months, and when people in Gaza look at them and ask what did they achieve, nothing except of bringing misery and suffering and destruction to the Gaza area.
All right. There are some big issues on the table. First of all, there's nuclearization, which we didn't have in 1948. There's Iran, which has become a mortal enemy of Israel. There is Hamas. There is Arafat. There is a lot of stuff that... How many wars, by the way, have you been through in Israel?
6 wars we fought.
Yeah, and you personally?
3.5, I think.
Weren't you a paratrooper at one time?
Yes.
During which campaign?
Oh, well, that was in between the wars, really. After 67 and the 73 war, I didn't actually participate because my brother got killed, so they pulled me back from the front. But then the war in Lebanon, that was an eye-opener. You learn something about the media there. And then the other 2 intifadas and the Gulf War, so I've seen some action.
I think we have to remember one thing. At least for the last 10 years, the media is an important element of the war itself. You have to win the media war even before you start the military operations. And I think we gained a lot of experience in how to do that. And, you know, I was involved in my time. But today, you see the thing, everybody, you know, you talk about day 1, day 2, day 10 in the operation, and still, the media still continues to play an important role in whatever. And people don't break. People don't break. And even the support for Israel is not dwindling, is not going down. Yes, there is all those who are against us, Hamas and the Islamic Jihad, and all over the world, and particularly in Europe. Europe is something else. But look, in the major countries that see Israel as an important element in the Middle East, the United States, when you talk about China, when you talk about other countries that really, they don't deal with that. And as long as we stay strong enough and able to continue this, we will continue.
What was the most exciting thing that ever happened to you since you lived in Israel?
Well, it's hard to say. I would say that when I was a boy in 1967, a young boy, before I entered the army, the reunification of Jerusalem, and I heard it on the radio, and we saw the pictures. That was really an exhilarating moment, not just for me, but I think for the rest of the Jewish people. And I still recall it, because I remember going to Jerusalem in an armored car, you know, where you had to duck when you reached Nebi Samuel. And then suddenly, you know, the city is united. Regrettably, some people want to divide it again today. I don't think that's going to work.
The great story of 67, I know personally from Ezer Weitzman, who was very close to me, is that Weitzman had called King Hussein of Jordan and said, stay out of this war. And what was happening is that the Egyptians were feeding false information that the Egyptians were winning the war. Nasser was winning the war. Remember that song, Nasser Mechakel Rabin?
Yes.
Ay, 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 right? And so they were misinformed, and Weitzman in his bloody English says, you know, keep your bloody hands out of here and you'll be okay. And he didn't listen. And so they went into Jerusalem. One of the great generals in that battle, I'll name a few, Matagur, Uri Ben Ari, these were all the fellas who captured Jerusalem. The other guy who was on my show, the short guy, he died. What's his name? He captured actually Jerusalem. The big picture with him.
Yeah, I forget his name.
Very nice guy. He was on the show. He wrote a book about it.
Right.
Great guy.
Head of the Jewish Agency later.
Right.
For a minute.
Narkis, Uzi Narkis.
Uzi Narkis.
We got it. It's a memory night tonight about Israel. So, and Matti Hud, who ran the Air Force, decimated the Egyptians. A lot of people don't know this history. You know, as we go further, in about 3 minutes, they knocked out the whole Air Force of Egypt, and this was a humongous victory. But Aubrey Eben was on the show, Abba Eben, as you would know him, and said one of the problems after the Six-Day War was that we had to decide then, the Israelis, that we weren't conquerors and we needed a strategy for peace, but it was very hard. The euphoria was unbelievable in Israel at that time, and no one could talk that way. And then there's this famous picture of Rabin and Dayan walking to the wall. It's one of the most famous pictures probably of the 20th century.
Well, that's very interesting, because unlike previous Israeli operation, this time the reaction in the Arab world to the operation and to the war was quite limited, mainly in Egypt. It's not only that Egypt doesn't like Hamas, it sees Hamas as a threat to Egyptian national security, to the Egyptian national interests, part of the Muslim Brothers. Also in Lebanon, also in other parts of the Arab world, the elites and also the Arab streets is not happy about what Hamas is doing right now. Well, the only ally which was left is the Emirate of Qatar for its own interest consideration. Qatar decided to back Hamas. Well, Qatar also backed the Muslim Brothers in Egypt. Qatar also backed the Islamic rebels in Syria. So it's part of a gamble they took in Qatar to support the radicals all over the Arab world. In most places they failed. In the case of Hamas, they still hope to gain something. Well, it's part of their game. It's a very small emirate. I mean, 250,300,000 residents and almost a million foreign workers from the Far East and from Egypt and North Africa. They are being threatened by their big neighbors, the Saudis on one hand and the Iranians on the other hand. So their answer to this very precarious situation is, on the one hand, to host the Americans and to have the biggest American military base in the Gulf in Qatar, and on the other hand to back the radicals, Hezbollah, Hamas, even the Islamic State is being said to get some support from the Qataris. So that's how they think they can survive in a very troubled region.
By the way, you must know David Rubinger, the photographer.
Yes, he was a good friend of mine. Took a couple of pictures of me when he was in Lebanon, and after. I think he still works, you know.
He's done wonderful work.
Yeah, he had recently had an exhibition of all
wonderful pictures. Probably the greatest
depiction of Israel's history in photos.
Fantastic, great guy. Yeah. So, okay, we're now at the present. We have Iran nudging us all the time. Right. We have Hamas.
That's the big difference, I think.
Right.
The big difference. We had the terrorist organization. We had enemies before. As I said, 7 Arab armies in 1948, right. And then Egypt and Syria and Jordan and all of them. Today, the situation is much more complex because while the voices we hear are of Hamas, Al-Qaeda and Hezbollah, the hands are Iranian, all over the place.
Yeah, we know.
The Palestinian movement has been hijacked by the Iranians. Arabs are afraid to stand up to it. So, you know, when we meet Hamas, it's the frontline units of Iran in Gaza. When we fight with Hezbollah in the north, that's again the elite forces of Iran. Iran is the major problem, not just Israel's problem, but the world's problem. That's something that the newly elected president of the United States will have to deal with.
Now, the Gaza situation focused the whole thing that, you know, if the Arab countries don't want to face a situation where terrorist organizations will control them as they are controlling Gaza, they have to take an action. And therefore, you see the possibility, I mean, greater than ever before, since 1973, since the end of the October War and the beginning of the talks with Egypt, there's a new situation. We're having new partners that are doing something for the peace peace process, not because they like Israel, not because they want Israel, they think, but because they are afraid of their own self. They're afraid of their own countries. The countries in the Persian Gulf, in Saudi Arabia, in Kuwait, in other countries. They see that if this will happen in our country, we are facing a situation like this. So we would like, I mean, they're not saying it outright, but privately they're saying, oh, we would like Israel to continue the job, do the job. I think Morsi, the fact that Morsi was there, and now you have the new government in Egypt with a leader that wants to see, it's because he understands that if Israel succeeds in this operation, and if they can contribute to this operation, this will create a better situation and will make Egypt a stronger country. Look at the Arab countries around you. The only country that is supported, that sees a real threat to their existence and is trying to do something is Egypt. Not because they like Israel. I don't think they like Israel. I think they understand that if they will allow the Middle East to deteriorate into a situation where organizations like Hamas spread throughout the Middle East, then their very existence will be threatened. In other words, we're in the same boat, and the boat is sinking. So we got to do something to stop the sinking.
All over the Arab world there is this tension, there is this competition, there is this struggle for power between what I would call the secular elements and the Muslim brothers. In Egypt we saw it, on the one hand Sisi and the Egyptian army, on the other hand the Muslim brothers, and Sisi and the Egyptian army crushed the Muslim brother. Here in the Palestinian arena the opposite happened. Hamas crushed Abu Mazen and the secular PLO Fatah movement in Gaza. So this is a bitter war, bitter animosity. They of course can reach some understanding, but this will be always very temporarily and on a tactical basis. There can be no real conciliation between these two enemies.
You remember more than anybody the scudding of Israel. You were broadcasting on top of the Hilton Hotel and talking about it all the time. As an Israeli, do you feel that the war that the United States went into to combat or knock out Hussein was beneficial to the Middle East?
Yes, I think, look, we have many problems in the Middle East. So you could say, well, Iran was a greater foe of the West and Israel than Iraq, but they were both
well, you and I remember they were scudding Israel. I mean, I talked to the head of the Air Force at that time. He said he was ready to go in and take him, but Eagleberger came to ask Shamir not to do anything. I mean, that was a very famous moment in Israeli history.
People have short memories, And today, when you talk about Iraq, they say, why did we go into Iraq? And they forget that there was 9/11. They forget that Iraq was a haven for terrorists all along. And had Iraq stayed the way it was, it would still be a major haven for Al-Qaeda as it is today, but even worse. Because then they will have a leader, they will have the immunity of a country that gives protection to terrorists. And right now, the reason that this land of the free and home of the brave is living peacefully, relative peacefully, because 140,000 American troops are fighting there and fighting in Afghanistan. World War III is upon us, except the American people don't realize it.
When you were with Ariel Sharon, did you meet with Abbas?
Yes, I met with Abbas when Ariel Sharon was still foreign minister in Y Plantation. And then I met him afterwards several times.
How do you read him? Does he have any power to do anything?
Well, that's the real tragedy of the Palestinian people. He's an encapsulation of the tragedy. Because finally there's someone who really wants to do good to the Palestinian people, but he has no power. And those who wield power have no will.
And even the prime minister now is a pretty decent guy of the PLO, isn't he?
They are Salim Fayyad.
Right.
Yes. All reasonable people. But, you need to use force. You need to have power in order to accomplish things in the Middle East. You come with lofty ideas about democracy, but it won't work unless there is a strong leader that can impose stability and then work democracy slowly. And that was the advice that Sharon gave to President Bush at that time. Said, democracy in Iraq, first try to get stability there.
No, it depends very much. Abu Mazen will have much more say in what is happening in Gaza if he can bring food and money and construction into Gaza, the rebuilding of under support of Egypt, where you can send in, to build, to do things for the people of Gaza, health, education, welfare, things that through Egypt, opening the borders, but under the control of Egypt, to the Palestinian people. It has to be through the active support of Egypt. Because Egypt holds the line. Egypt is the only opening that will allow to add goods, support, health, education, everything that can restore Gaza back to what it was, what it hoped it was.
First try to create, a nation that could work together. Every time you try to introduce democracy to the Middle East, you get anarchy because there's no political culture to support it.
I was interviewed by Yediot Ahronon yesterday about Jimmy Carter, who was not the favorite son of the Jewish people today. And I said to them that I remember Menachem Begin telling me that at that point, Carter was the best president Israel ever had because he brought us peace. I remember those words, and anyone can track them at the Camp David Peace Treaty, which I attended. Now, at that point, Carter was saying that you need to have, the PLO has to have a Palestinian state. If you told that to Arik Sharon in '79, he'd have thrown you out of the room with a football, or like a football. But when you were working with him, he had agreed there would be a Palestinian state. Bibi Netanyahu agreed there will be a Palestinian state. So what the country needs is some prescient understanding of what is going to happen in the future. No one ever thought, when you were in the government at the earliest stages, that you would be talking to Palestinians. I went to see Arafat because of the Israeli government's request. So the things change. So my question to you is, ultimately, will you have to talk to Hamas, or if they want to talk, or should you talk to them?
You know what, Leon? I have no problems talking to Hamas, but saying to them straight, as I learned in Brooklyn, what is the deal? The deal is, you mess with us, you get kicked in the ass. You deal with us, you're ready to recognize, you get a good deal. I mean, that's the way we should approach. We're a winning society. We should project our winning spirit and tell the Arab, you want to negotiate with us, peace, fine. You don't want to negotiate, we have places to go for the next 60 years.
All right.
There will be a maximum effort on all counts, both on the ground as well as in the air, to minimize create a situation where Hamas, in all its efforts and all the things, the military capability, will be reduced in its capability to actually cause damage to Israel and continue this operation over time. There will be an element of fatigue. And in addition to that, offer something to the Palestinian population. So it has to be both. You have to work on both sides. Offer to the Palestinian, the poor Palestinian, who are under the yoke and under the support, the pressure of Hamas, to something that they can hope for, and at the same time, and this has to start immediately, so that the money can come through, so that there will be new jobs and new things, new operation, the restoration. In other words, it's so like after World War II, that the most important thing about creating in Europe a new situation was the Marshall Plan. Create some sort of a Marshall Plan for the poor Palestinian, and that enabled Europe to come about and to avoid the continuation of becoming supporters of the Nazi regime.
Well, that's the dilemma, that's the question we are facing. On the one hand, Hamas said they are not ready to accept the right of Israel to exist. On the other hand, they were ready to reach some kind of an understanding and even to offer Israel some sort of a ceasefire. And you ask yourself whether eventually Hamas can change its policy and ideology and become part of the supporters of peace in the region, of the peace camp. I have no clear answer. Maybe in the long run, in 20, 30 years, Hamas can change and become more pragmatic. That's, by the way, what happened to the PLO. The PLO was very radical 30, 40 years ago, and through the years it moderated. But the problem is that we don't have 20, 30 years to wait till Hamas will come to the conclusion that it should adjust itself to the realities in the region and to come into terms with Israel. We need it to do it now, and that's not going to happen.
All right, so the big question to you, Shteirot. There can never be peace unless Shteirot is quiet. We say that all the time. You can have X, Y, Z agreement, everything. What should the government be doing in Sderot today? Should they go in there and attack? What should they do? You're a military guy.
The problem is not Sderot. The problem is not Ashkelon. The problem is in Gaza. And the problem is not Gaza.
Oh, I agree. I mean, but Gaza is shelling Sderot.
There has to be a plan, an integrated plan of both political and military, where at the right time you go in, you make a cleanup operation, and then you call the Arab countries and the United Nations to take control and use and have some sort of trusteeship of that area. Otherwise,
did you ever discuss this issue with Arik Sharon?
Well, yes, we did discuss. And you know, the whole disengagement that was started.
Yeah, that was under you.
Exactly.
Not under you, under Sharon.
I know.
But you were the spokesman.
But it was never fully fulfilled. Implemented.
Why?
Not the deterrence part. Not the part that if they refuse to deal with us, we'll kick their ass. At that time, we didn't do that. And as a result of that, of course, you know, the ascendancy of Hamas with Iran into the area, you know, shuffled all the cards of the deck.
How difficult, you were there during that decision, how difficult a decision was that for him to unilaterally disengage Arik Sharon?
Tormenting and excruciating, very painful for him. It was very painful. You have to understand, this is the man who envisioned the settlement movement, that thought that, you know, he is actually continuing in the footsteps of the labor movement who started settling the country 80, 90 years before.
Right.
And then
he's saying something very important, because Arik Sharon's parents were really laborites. Right. In fact, when Arik Sharon became a Likud prime minister, he went, I understand, to Tel Aviv and sat on Ben Gurion's chair, and they didn't like it too much, the Likud. Am I correct?
Yeah, he used to say to the laborites, and I'd say, how did we lose you? And he said to them, you didn't lose me, you lost yourself, you lost your way. You are not following in the footsteps of Ben Gurion and the founding fathers, I am. So it was very painful, Gaza. But Gaza was a clear, excruciating, painful decision, as my good friend Uri Dan, who died 2 years ago,
Uri Dan was a very close friend of Sharon, a journalist.
And he said, you know, it's very excruciating and painful, but in order to save Judea and Samaria, we got to leave the rest and keep the best.
He wanted to keep a Jewish state, and he was afraid of the demographics?
Was the demographic, and also the fact that, you know, 30,000 soldiers had to support the 8,000 people who lived in Gaza, was an untenable situation, where you needed the resources, other places, where you needed the support of the United States to recognize for the first time that Jews will have parts of Judea and Samaria, their ancestral homeland, as their homeland, as their state, with security borders there. Gaza is isolated. So, you know, we would have liked to have a Jewish settlement in Gaza if we had 80,000 instead of 8,000.
Right on. Now, you're not talking to young Judea now, you're talking to the Leon Charney report.
I know, Leon.
Did he make this decision solo, or was he influenced totally by the Americans?
Well, he wasn't. You know, there was he conducted negotiation with President Bush, not with the Palestinians.
And he got a great letter out of Bush.
That's it. That was, and for that letter he paid with Gaza. One of the payment was paying with Gaza.
You're hearing it on the Leon Charney report. That's the truth. Because if you knew Arik Sharon and you went to the Olympia restaurant at 5 o'clock on Friday nights when everybody like us was sitting around talking to him with Uri Dan, you remember those days?
Yes.
The Olympia, the old Olympia.
That was
that was a Club 21 in Tel Aviv where all of us hung out. The
unofficial parliament.
That's right. It's Adler, myself, you, Ilya Tehila, Ezer Weitzman, Rabin, the whole gang. I'm giving you a history here. And so Sharon really formed this relationship with Bush. Bush came as a governor. He took him over the hills.
I tell you, I was the one who forced Sharon to take him on a helicopter ride in 1998. I said, listen, he's a governor today. One day he may become president. I never knew what I was saying.
You get the Israeli prize for that.
Well, I tell you, that was a fluck of the moment when I said to Fred Zeidman, okay, let's take him on a helicopter ride. State Department was against. They didn't want American officials to land on occupied territory. I said, this is the marvels of modern technology. We have a helicopter. It hovers 50 inches above the ground. And that's how he got to know Israel. And
this is real history, because Sharon developed a relationship with Bush. Bush really admired Sharon as a real fighter and a real general. He has a good relationship with Olmert, but it's different. It's like a golfing buddy. This guy is more reverence. There was real reverence there. And I don't think Sharon would be impressed by White House dinners and all that stuff. He had seen everything in his life. He didn't care. I want to go. I see. I go. I go. And
he was a very straightforward man. I once tell you one story. One day at one of the dinners, you know, Bush was talking to the audience and everything, and to the people, you know, the entourage, and he was saying, you know, my visit to Israel, I had a revelation. So Sharon nudges me and said, what's a revelation? You know, he knew English, but the world. So I wrote him in Hebrew. It's a Christian spiritual experience, you know, when you see the light, you see something happening. And you know what? Every time there was pressure, and the advisors would tell Sharon, listen, he's gonna put pressure on you. The advisor, Condi and Colin Powell, they're gonna put pressure on Israel to stop the settlements, to do their part in the negotiation. And he said, Raanan, what do you think? I said, I think, you know, it will stop at the president's desk. He said, why? I said, because he had a revelation.
Good for you. Well, he needs one now. I mean, his polls are really down. He's going out now, and who knows what will happen.
It's a new era for America. It's a new era for Israel. Whoever's going to be the president of the United States, if you'll do good for the United States, you'll also be good for Israel. If you won't do good for the United States, you won't be good for Israel.
I don't believe any president of the United States will do anything egregious to the state of Israel.
No, that's for sure, not intentionally.
No, I don't think.
But I would say, you know, with some good intentions. I don't think you can talk today to Hamas. I don't think you can talk to the Iranians. You know, you can come to the Iranians and dictate a deal. That's the one thing that you can do. But to talk to them about what? That they will stop meddling in Iraqi affairs, and in return the United States will let them have the bomb? If Iran has the bomb, this will be a nuclear nightmare, for not just for the Middle East, but for the rest of the world. And then maybe the United States, after 2 years, when Iran has the bomb, says, we have no choice. We have to go out after Iran. With what? With tactical nuclear weapons? I don't want to live in a neighborhood where they're using tactical nuclear weapons.
Raanan, you know what they're talking about in Israel? Everybody's crying that the shekel is up and the dollar is down.
Well, you know, we have a robust economy. It's floating on top of tsunami waves.
No one would believe that the shekel is a trading currency in the world today.
A year ago, it was 4.20 or 4.30 to the dollar. Now it's 3.50.
Raanan, we're running out.
Thank you very much.
Always a pleasure. And you've heard some stuff that you're really not going to hear. I mean, you hear him on the tour all the time, but we like to get inside and see what was going on. Like people drill me about my relationship with Asa Weitzman. One day I'll let Raanan interview me about that. We'll be right back.
Peace means taking into account the dignity of other people and the fact that there are other people who have certain rights.
Peace in the Middle East basically will come when the clergy in the mosque on Friday preach it, and when the rabbis in the synagogue on Saturday preach it. During the time of Camp David I, you had political leadership that was able to contain that type of religious fervor. What the country needs is some prescient understanding of what is going to happen in the future.
Tune in when the Leon Charney Report begins a special series on the Israeli-Palestinian question.
The Leon Charney Report congratulates the team of BDC, The Price of Peace, and Leon Charney on the New York Emmy Awards win. The documentary reveals the true story of the negotiations leading up to the greatest diplomatic achievement of our time, the Camp David Accords between Israel and Egypt. Watch it on Hulu.com. or buy the special feature edition DVD at select stores.
Now get the book the hit movie was based on, Leon Charney's Backdoor Channels. Learn about the backdoor channel negotiations that led to the historic 1978 Israeli-Egyptian peace treaty. Become a witness to history and order Backdoor Channels online at Amazon or Barnes & Noble. Also available at all other retailers and booksellers. Or download the audiobook at iTunes or audible.com. Relive history. Order Backdoor Channels. Get best-selling author Leon Charney's latest book, The Battle of the Two Talmuds. Join Charney as he explores years of Jewish history to find out why and how Talmudic scholars and rabbis abandoned the Holy Land for the lands of the diaspora. Learn about the power struggles behind the creation of the Jerusalem and Babylonian Talmuds. It's a book critics call engaging and enlightening. A book which will be of interest to people of every faith. Now available at Amazon and Barnes & Noble, or download the audiobook of The Battle of the Two Talmuds at iTunes or audible.com. Leon Charney sets out to discover the true meaning of the Kaddish, the Jewish custom of reciting a prayer to commemorate the death of a close relative. Join Charney as he finds out the history of the Kaddish and how it has evolved. Reviewed as a refreshing walk through Jewish history and a book that deserves to be read by both Jews and non-Jews, The Mystery of the Kaddish is now available online at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and all other retailers and booksellers. Or download the audiobook at audible.com or on iTunes. Discover The Mystery of the Kaddish. Available now over iTunes, Amazon, and Google Play. Leon Charney's cantorial CD and Disco Lam. Listen as Charney movingly sings El Mole Rachamim and Charney's amazing rendition of a disco remix of Adon Olam, all sung in the incredible and individual Charney style. Also listen to the CDs on Rhapsody. Download Leon Charney's cantorial songs and Disco Lam, the disco remix of Adon Olam on Amazon, iTunes, and Google Play. Or listen in on Rhapsody. All available now.
When I was in Israel a couple of weeks ago, Obama's popularity was 6%.
Yeah.
Has it gone to 7 or it's still at 6?
No, I don't think so. I think the popularity issue is an important issue. But more important for us, I think now, is to mend relations between the White House and the Prime Minister's office. Because, we have good indication, the recent exercise, strategic exercise.
Military exercise.
Excellent.
Was between...
And it's the widest and largest in scope that ever existed.
So
it dealt with all the possible contingencies of concern to the two countries, including Iran.
Well, you're a former military man, so break that down for me. What did it do exactly?
Look, I said it, to many people who ask me. There are many Holocaust museums, so we won't forget. There's one Israel, so it will never happen again. And that's it. If worse comes to worse, we'll know how to defend ourselves because we have no choice. We have no choice, and we know how to defend ourselves. However, it's not enough to have brains. You have to have intelligence. And how do you handle Iran? The nuclear program is only a byproduct of a regime that is an extremist, radical regime that wants to destabilize the economies of the Western world through terrorist activity.
We know that.
If they get the nuclear bomb, it will be much easier for them to act with impunity.
We know that also.
Okay, so now how do you stop the nuclear bomb?
That's the problem.
You have several types of sanctions that have to be put in.
You believe in
effect.
sanctions?
What?
You believe in sanctions?
I'll tell you which sanctions. You start with economic sanctions, you move to diplomatic sanctions. These are the kind of sanctions in which that they boycott Iran from any kind of international forum, including upstaging and preventing its upstaging itself on the UN in the UN arena.
Yeah.
And the third one are personal sanctions.
All right.
Personal sanctions is they should have in their hearts the same fear that they try to instill in their opponents.
All right. We'll talk about that in a minute. You remember a guy named Saddam Hussein, right?
Right.
Remember we did some sanctions on him. You remember that?
Yeah.
You know how wealthy he got from those sanctions?
No,
he got shekels, dollars, euros, everything.
The problem was Saddam Hussein was one man. And here you have an elite that is governing a country, with ruthless, brutal measures, but is highly vulnerable to what is happening beneath. Saddam Hussein did not have that kind of
There is a simmering revolution going on beneath in Iran.
Simmering, and you got to support it. You got to encourage it with money. You got to encourage it with build the leadership that is necessary for that. And all the time, let the people in Tehran.
But Israel can't afford to do that alone. It has to do that in conjunction with the
That's
Western
why it
world.
has to be a coalition effort. It has to be led by the United States. It has to be the kind of operations that are not declared but are being done on a weekly basis, so that the leaders in Tehran wake up in the middle of the night, covered with cold sweat, thinking, is it safe to sleep in the same bed, or should we move to another bed? Then you'll have behavior modification.
Now tell me the truth, you who are an ex-army man, I think a paratrooper, right? Are you worried about Iran every night you go to sleep?
No, not every night, but I am worried. I think it's a major concern. I'm not, look, when I see this scenario, I don't see Iran mounting a nuclear bomb, a nuclear device on a Shihab missile and sending it to Israel. But the overall situation in which Iran has nuclear weapons will open a new era, will open a Pandora box, a nuclear arms race. Under the protection of the umbrella, they could use terrorism all over the world.
It's not good, obviously, but one thing it has done is, and we said it 100 times already, united the Sunni populations like Egypt, Jordan, Saudi Arabia. They're all with Israel.
They have to play a key role. But for them to play a key role, the United States must take the leadership position. Demonstrate leadership.
They're ready to buy tickets in shuls, believe me, rather than go...
Nobel Peace Prize winner or not. There are two options, two types of leaders. You can be a Chamberlain, waving your umbrella and promising peace in our time,
or a Churchill. How did I know you were going to say Churchill? How did I know that? Asa Weitzman, my old friend,
Churchill better than I do.
My old friend Asa Weitzman used to say there are a few leaders in the world left. He thought Castro, by the way, was a leader. He thought he was a leader. He didn't like him, but he thought he was a leader.
People followed him.
Where is Russia tickling you now in Israel? I must tell you, I met the ambassador. I've said it on this show. He's a very good man. I had about a 5-hour discussion with him, one-on-one. Very interesting man. But they are still. The rumor was that Bibi flew to Russia on a 10-hour.
Yeah, look, the Russians are trying to get a piece of the action from Iran as long as it's not too dangerous.
Manishtana. When is that different?
That's one thing. But if you ask me, who is one of the world experts on what should be done inside Iran, talk to Putin. He got the right education and the right institution.
KGB, you know what they call him in Yiddish?
They know how to do those things.
So, if you're not worried about Iran, the economy is good in Israel, what do you have to talk about when you come here?
Well, I think there are other important issues. There's the Arab population in Israel, which is simmering and coming out. And, of course, the Arab members of Knesset, I think, have gone overboard.
Ahmad Tibi?
Yeah.
Really? He's gone nuts?
Well, we're in a state of war. And you have,
What does he want, Tibi?
What?
What does he want?
They want a state for all its citizens. They don't want a Jewish state. It's not what they want, what they don't want. They don't want a Jewish state.
They want a democratic area.
And they think if you work from inside, you can achieve better results than if you put pressure from outside.
All right, well, Raanan, we know that the West Bank economically is doing much better, and there's a lot of cooperation between the forces, the security forces. But Abbas is hanging on. What's going on with this guy?
Well, for the past few years, we in the United States and all other moderate countries that were concerned were engaged in this major effort, which I called it a sequel to Spielberg's movie, Saving Private Mazen. We send the whole team to save this guy so that there will be someone to talk with. It's true. It's important.
Very dangerous. You made him a private. You could have said general.
General. Okay, I'll make him a general.
Anybody watching the show is going to be a
No, but I was referring to the other movie, Saving Private Ryan. So, but truthfully, it's not just that the security forces. The reason that there is prosperity in the West Bank, and that's the truth, is because we conduct nightly operations. We pay house calls to would-be terrorists, and we pluck them out of their beds. So there's no terrorism. No terrorism in the streets. Industry can flourish. Commerce can flourish. People come in investment. It's very simple. And Gaza, just the opposite picture. Gaza is on the way to becoming Somalia under the regime of Hamas.
Here is an organization that accepts nothing except the destruction of Israel and does everything in order to start, whether it's the tunnels, whether it's the missiles that keep hitting Israel day and night, you know, for 2 weeks now. This is the essence of it. In other words, that required the kind of support that will get the whole people together, a leadership that could lead on that. And I'm glad to say that, although I doubt it very much that Netanyahu will be able to do that, he did it. He did it because he was actually forced into it by the people of Israel, by the government of Israel. The people of Israel were behind him. The first time, I think, so much support, you know, broad support to the government, to the leader of Israel, than it was. I don't think we ever experienced something as a society, as a people, like this situation, except maybe the war in 1973. Except the war in 1973.
We thought that the Goldstein report was really offensive to the state of Israel, and I'm sure you felt the same way. It's beyond me why a Jewish personality would undertake such a position. You know, he may be a fair man, he may be a great man, he may do everything, but this is an area that is so troublesome that for him to undertake it, and it seemed to be totally unbalanced. From what I read of it, it was terribly unbalanced.
Everybody wants to bask in the limelight of public diplomacy, of the media.
Tell me about it. I lived through it. I know.
You know, we've been in this business long enough to know what it does to people when they're too much in the limelight, you know. By the way, at the end, it burns their wings, you know.
What was the reaction in Israel to Goldstone?
Well, you know, naturally, everybody, you know, with great consternation looked at it and said, you know, how come, you know, the only country in the world that exercises the uncontested right, according to UN Article 51, the UN Charter, Article 51, the right of self-defense is an uncontested right. And Israel is brought to court by a lynching committee for exercising its right of self-defense. This is very dangerous for the future for other Western countries.
That's what I said about the report. You know, I don't know how much teeth it has at the UN, but the perception is terrible. I mean, I say it all the time, so close your ears, but if Sderot is being bombed, there'll be no peace. If Sderot is quiet, there can be some kind of peace. What will happen in Gaza is, I don't think, it's unknown at this point now. I don't know what kind of leadership they have there. I don't know what they want to do.
Well, first of all, the military wing, as I mentioned before, Hamas is not all about the military wing, but the military wing, well, I think we should start calling them an army or a militia. It's not anymore a terrorist organization, you know, with almost 10,000 missiles. It's also a mini army. So the army, the military wing, did, by the way, quite well, had built for itself a very impressive, or acquired a very impressive arsenal of missiles and established fighting units. The interesting thing was that Israel was not at all after the military wing. Israel was not at all after after Hamas as a political entity in Gaza, because the Israeli message was quite clear from the beginning. We want Hamas to stay in power in Gaza. Why is that? Because Israel has no alternative, and Israel was afraid that the result of a chaos and the collapse of the Hamas government will be the emergence to power of and the appearance of more radical Islamic group like Daesh, like the Islamic State that we saw in Iraq and Syria, and might get also to Gaza. So on the one hand, we launched an operation against Hamas. On the other hand, we told these people, we want you to stay in power, but we want to deter you. We want you to keep the border quiet. Now, Hamas has nothing to lose, because on the one hand, they know that Israel is not after them. On the other hand, they need to come to the people of Gaza and explain them what happened during the last month. So this is the tension. This is the dilemma they themselves are facing. This led to their conclusion. We want a ceasefire, but at the same time we are ready to play a little bit. I mean, play a little bit. It's not like we used to see at the first days of the battle. They are not launching any more rockets towards Tel Aviv, but still they are playing with us, and this is the result of the constraints of Israel.
There's a problem. Everybody's saying, well, eventually we'll have to talk to Hamas. Israel and Hamas cannot dwell at the same place. Not because, the Hamas that wants to destroy Israel. Because Israel presents a winning paradigm. And as long as Israel is winning, they are losing. And that is something, that's why they take us to court. That's why they do this lynching committee, because they can't beat us. Israel is winning. That's the thing. It's winning as a society. It's winning in terms of its morality. It's the Statue of Liberty for people in the Middle East. They cross the border. They come from Egypt to seek work, to seek refuge in Israel. They don't go to other countries. So there's something about Israel in the perception of individual people that make them cause them to risk their life to cross the border and to come to Israel. What? No, something. Apparently, we're doing something right. And the other countries, their model is based on misery, on despair, on death. How long can that continue when they see Israel flourishing? So the only solution is to destroy Israel, to remove it from the map. Because as long as Israel is there, they don't have a chance to win. Their model cannot win.
Do you think there can be rapprochement between Gaza and the West Bank, between Abu Mazen and the leaders of Hamas?
Only if the Arab countries, the moderate, get off the fence and take action. Egypt is sitting on the fence. Turkey is sitting on the fence. They're waiting to see leadership from the United States. If they're not sure that the United States is committed to what it says, and committed to stay in the Middle East, and committed to defend them when Iran suddenly decides to move out, and to lash out, they won't do it. Look, Iran started its aggressive policy in 2003, at the day that American forces invaded Iraq. Why? They said, now they'll be bogged down in Iraq. This is our chance.
The leadership in that world, I think Iran, which is really not an Arab country, wants to be the leader of the Arab people, and it can't happen. It can never happen.
Because of the 1400 years feud between Sunni and Shia.
I always say it, if Muhammad had a male heir, you wouldn't have this problem. They split because they never had a male heir, and you had the Sunni.
True.
One was the brother-in-law, one was the cousin. Can you imagine families getting together? But the belief is that Israel has the capacity and the capability of taking care of Iran if it needs to do it even on its own. Would you concur with that?
Yeah, I mean, let's put it this way. As I said, Israel will know how to defend itself by itself. This is the motto of Israel's existence. We don't rely on others. Once we relied on others, see what happened. But this is not the preferred option. This is the last option. And until we get to that, we got some 2 years where a lot of things that I mentioned could be done. But it requires, first and foremost, leadership. And the world is looking up to the man they gave him the Nobel Peace Prize. But you know what they say in Latin? Para bellum. Those who seek peace must be prepared to wage war.
That's right. Obama's a very interesting personality, and he's questionable as to whether he has the leadership capacity from his background to make such major decisions. I'm not clear on that yet.
Look,
and you can't be.
As a political scientist, political analyst, someone who know a little bit about American politics, when you sit there, that determines where you stand, really. When you sit at the chair, that's the hottest chair in the world.
Of course.
And you've got so many responsibilities. And in addition to that, the first year, there's always a learning curve. Every president that I know for the past 40 years had to learn. Yeah. But if it really wanted to be a leader of the free world, every president needs something like the Cuban Missile Crisis to pass that crisis between a rock and a hard spot and make a decision. So
you don't think he has enough crises?
He has to choose a place where he demonstrates his will to use force. Could be in North Korea. It could be in Afghanistan, which is very critical, because if you win the war on the enclaves and on the countryside in Afghanistan, you prevent Pakistan from falling.
I think he should go into the world of Hasidim. There are a lot of wars between certain rabbis in the Hasidic community. That's where he should make his play. Yeah. I hope he does. You know his problem? He's a great speaker. And you know what? Great speakers tend to think that their speeches make the events happen, and they don't. And you know that as well as anybody in the world. Churchill rallied his country with his speech, but he also had action and he had decisiveness. Franklin Roosevelt rallied this country out of a depression because he made things happen. Obama's background is not really there yet.
But you know, on the other hand, Leon, I'll say to you, I say to his credit, and I'm not taking sides. He's a fast learner. He corrects his mistakes quickly. So he has the capacity to be the kind of leader that we expect him to be. But this year, next year, we'll say so. I mean, you can't avoid a place where you have to make a stand.
I personally think he's a terrific guy. I think he represents a very good aspect of the United States, and especially that we elected a black American.
He's a composite image of the new United States.
He's wonderful. My question is, I don't know the answer, and I'll save it for you for next time. Ezer Weitzman and I used to talk about this all the time. Are leaders born, or are they manufactured once they get into their positions? We don't know the answer.
It's one thing to run for president. It's another thing to run the presidency.
Right.
It's another thing. And there's a lot you have to learn. If you have the capacity to learn, look, you know, when Truman achieved power, nobody thought he would be it, but he was a good running president. He knew how to run the country. And today he's hailed as one of the greatest presidents.
Yeah, if he went to
his campaign was lousy.
But if he went to college and made the Harvard Law Review, I'm not sure he'd be in the same place.
Just one last word. At Israel's 60th anniversary, I think it's important for the Jewish people in the United States and elsewhere, and I speak to a lot of groups, to understand that they're supporting Israel not because of charity, but because they're associated with a winning enterprise. Winning enterprise for the Jews, a winning enterprise for the world. Israel is not the problem of the Middle East, it's a solution.
Amen. We end on that note.